these are the narratives that pushes you in the people-pleasing behavior. And that's a dangerous zone, because eventually you will build that frustration in your life where you feel that nobody gets you. You feel overwhelmed because you're only giving and not receiving. And at the top of that, you are not being respected in the realm of your boundaries, because people get used to getting and not needing to give back.
You're listening to Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. I've spent the last 4 years trying to discover how to break the burnout cycle, and as a high achiever in a fast-paced world, I know how easy it is to slip back into old habits, leaving you feeling overwhelmed and left behind. If you're anything like me, then you need to hear this. Burning out is not your fault. Yes, you can recover from burnout, and the post-burnout growth is not only real, but it feels amazing. This podcast is dedicated to helping break the stigma around mental health in the workplace, ending burnout culture for good, and the action steps that you can take today towards your personal growth and success. So let's do it. Amanda, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you again for taking the time to join the show today.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Amanda, one thing that comes up a lot in burnout is that people think it's a phenomenon that only happens in the workplace, that when they start their career and they're like, oh, I have to stay in this job for the next 5 or 10 years so that it can get me going. And they don't realize that burnout can happen in any other part of their life. They're like, oh, it has to happen. It can only happen when I'm 5 years into the job or 10 years into the job. And if they feel stressed before that, or they start experiencing burnout symptoms before that, they're like, oh, this can't be burnout because, I haven't made it to this milestone in my career yet. They don't realize that the stepping stones to, the downward spiral of burnout actually starts a lot earlier. There's behaviors that we pick up when we are kids, when in our childhood, that spur us on to burnout later on in life, because while those behaviors may have served us in our childhood, keeping those behaviors can actually sabotage us as we go into our adult life. So what was that like for you, or what was your experience with that?
Well, indeed, actually, I like to think about burnout as even as mindset, I would say, because it starts from some point when you yourself are putting a lot of pressure on yourself, and basically the line of your boundaries is only getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So you're just taking more and more on your plate, right? And what happens is that when we enter into adulthood, even early adulthood, you experience basically more requirements to survive, so to say, maybe you need to support yourself, maybe you need to pay the bills. I mean, you need to juggle so many things that happen, right? And as life progresses, I think these demands are only increasing. So what happens in terms of burnout is that way of thinking, in combination with all this increasing pressure, is basically making us go into overdrive, right? And I think it indeed kind of starts, the concept itself, it can start early in childhood years when you are being formed. So firstly, you can see examples of your parents, of how they are behaving, right? How you see what their work-life balance is, to how they're coping with different stressful situations, right? Then your regulation. Are you taught how to regulate as a child? Or are you being taught to suck your feelings up, and just go ahead and do all these things that you're supposed to be doing, right? So all these things in combination, I think, is what actually brings our society. And on top of that, the increasing speed of society overall, I think it gives even additional stress or pressure, right? You need to be able to be the perfect mother, the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect worker, or entrepreneur, whoever you are. And as a result, all these demands and not being able to regulate and find that inner balance, so to say, leads us to burnout. So burnout happens not only in workplace, it can happen in life, even for somebody who is just a mother taking care of children at home, but she's not just a mother taking care of children at home, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think when it comes to those behaviors as well, they are behaviors. I think some people, they always blame it, or they victimize themselves by blaming it on their childhood. Oh, this is something that because of how I was treated as a kid. But if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, sometimes when a parent tells you when you're younger to, oh, be quiet and stop crying all the time, it's because it's a reflection on themselves that they want to be the perfect parent, and they don't want to have their kid crying all the time because they feel that they're a bad parent if their kid cries all the time. So they tell their kid not to cry all the time. So then they feel better as a parent because they have the kid that doesn't cry. Where now that kid is going to grow up and not know how to regulate their emotions. And while that may have served one way for the parent, maybe it might have tested the parent's patience a lot. Well, they might have had 3 or 4 crying kids when and that was very draining for a parent, and they might just tell the kids to shut up, or to be quiet and stop crying all the time. And while that may have served at the time, it actually has a long-term effect on the development of that child. And then they take that lack of ability to regulate their emotions into their teenage and adult life, and it affects them later on. And it's something that goes unaddressed if they don't bring it to their awareness.
Well, yeah, that's kind of a terminology of generational trauma, right? And the reality of these emotions, how I see it, is the fear of feeling somewhere deep down a deep guilt and shame. So the guilt comes also from your reaction, but the guilt is essentially how, is feeling guilty, how you see yourself respond to the situation, right? But the shame goes deeper. It ingrains into your identity. But the thing is that it's very difficult to stop the reactions, right, to the children, just because we are feeling these deep-seated emotions. And as a result, the coping mechanism becomes responding to the child in a manner that doesn't help children raise their emotional awareness. But at the same time, I think this is like, I find this topic very, very interesting, and I could talk hours about it, especially when it comes to, teaching emotional regulation to children and whatnot. But I think essentially the message here, like if we're going direction, let's say burnout and how it gets formed, is children, they need to complete their emotional cycles, and that's very important, right? And the parent who is feeling guilty and ashamed of the triggered emotions because the children are crying is what actually stops the children from completing these emotional cycles. So in essence, being told, I don't know, even being told what is wrong with you, why you're crying, or like, stop crying for once, stop being a whiny baby or whatever, I mean, you have all these things that are being told to you as a child, right? And I think we all experience them. And the challenge here is that children, they internalize everything, they take it literally, even though we don't mean that. So firstly, the language is very important, but it's also important to realize that these feelings that you get because your child is crying and or whining or not listening to you is deeply linked to the feelings of how you felt as a child when you were told not to cry or not to behave in a specific way, right? So it's very interlinked. And that's, I think, where the importance is to create awareness in society that your emotions are legit, but your emotions are linked to the past and not to the present. Does that make sense what I'm saying to you?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think again, whenever there's an expression of emotion and you see people deflecting it in a defensive way because they're not comfortable with dealing with that emotion themselves or regulating that emotion themselves. So their instinct is to tell other people not to experience that emotion or not to express that emotion because it makes them feel vulnerable also. So it's very, I think that's where when a parent is like, oh, stop whining all the time or stop only seeking attention, it's because that's probably how they were raised. Also, I think it's coming from their own experience, also how they were raised, and they put that on their own kids, whether they like it or not. It kind of, it just comes down, as you said, generational, it's conditioning as well. It's like, oh, that's how I was raised as a kid. And even though when it's happening to you, you're like, oh, I'd never treat my kids like that, but it just happens at the same time. If kids whining all the time, sometimes there's just an emotional outburst, and they're like, "Oh, stop crying! Oh, stop crying! You're always crying all the time. Why are you always seeking attention?" Rather than what is the root cause here? How can we help the child to regulate that? And I think there's just a lack of awareness on the subject and the effect that it can have, because we are seeing it in people in their teenage and their young adult life now, and they're completely burning out because they've developed tendencies of people pleasing. If I'm not people pleasing all the time, then I'm not showing up right in the world. I'm not making everyone else happy. I'm not doing enough to make everyone else around me happy, so they're not happy to have me around. Or then there's the self-sabotaging tendencies of not regulating their emotions or not speaking up if there's a problem, because if I speak up, I'm drawing attention to myself, and drawing attention to myself is bad. So I shouldn't draw attention to myself or look for help because it's expected of me to know how to do this. And it's those negative self-narratives that may have served us as a child, and we take them as truth into our adult life. And when it no longer serves us, we always think that if we bring this up, we're going to get in trouble from our parents. And we carry that same narrative, and we replace our parents with our teacher, our coach, or manager. And we feel that if we speak up or if we draw attention to this, I'll get in trouble, and it could cost me my job, my career. It could be the end of everything. And that's just what our brain tells us.
Yeah, indeed. And then another good thing to add to this is that the internal voice that we carry is actually formed in that early childhood. So it can be a voice of, for example, for me, I was raised by a narcissistic father. So my internal voice was by my narcissistic father saying, you know, that I'm stupid and that I cannot do things in anything good. So what happens is that you have an internal voice that you take away usually from your parents. And the internal voice that you carry becomes stronger and stronger because you are reinforcing it with life, right? With growing demands, your internal voice, which is your saboteur, actually is getting stronger and stronger. And over time, if you're not able to identify that voice, which is, by the way, very crucial, like in general, if you are seeking for more life balance, I would say, if you're seeking more for truthful living, you know, living that is more connected with yourself, it's very important to identify that negative voice that is telling you all sorts of lies, you know, lies that you're stupid, you know, or lies that you're not good enough, you know. And because it tells that, it reinforces your low self-esteem, which basically means that you are more wired to be a people pleaser. And by addressing these voices, you're able to quiet that voice down and hear the true voices within you, the voices that are actually acknowledging your capabilities, your strengths and your weaknesses, a voice that is being realistic, but also a voice that encourages you to seek for what you truly stand for.
I think one of the problems that a lot of people have is that awareness and trying to identify that narrative, because a lot of people, it's so uncomfortable to actually have that awareness or to identify that voice. It can be very raw and uncomfortable to try and find a root cause. So a lot of people just say, oh, this is just how I am. This is the way I've always been. And this is the way I'll always be. So there's no point in trying to change this. I just need to, live on autopilot or just work through this and not make any changes. And as a result, for years, they keep on sabotaging themselves and wonder why they get stuck in this rut. And sometimes you think they hit rock bottom and it's like, okay, this is the moment that they're going to change, because you can't make someone change. They have to come to that awareness themselves, or at least we can kind of expose them to saying, like this is a moment where you could change. There's an opportunity for you to change, but it has to get to a level of pain or discomfort so much that they choose to take the change themselves. So how do you help someone identify that the decisions they're making right now are because they have a self-sabotaging or negative self-narrative that's holding them back?
I think you're making a really good point here. The narrative that we get ourselves into is because we're not even able to hear our internal voices. We're not able to even understand how we feel, so we are stuck in this doing, going. And it starts from the early days where indeed you're pressured to choose what you want to do, even though I think a lot of the times, at least for me, it wasn't the case that I knew what I wanted to do in life, So what happens over the time is that because of these thought patterns, you also end up choosing probably also not really the job that is meant for you, right? Where the demands are actually, even maybe for somebody else who, is really wired to do that job, these demands wouldn't feel so big, but for somebody who is not wired to do that job, these demands can feel very big. And as a result, it can contribute to that draining. So my suggestion is, or like how I at least like to work, I have developed my own way, so my own technique, which is called EbIT. It's evidence-based integrational transformation. And it's basically a stack of methods, which are sort of, to say, holistic, but it's also evidence-based on psychology and on coaching. So it includes different psychological modalities, as well as coaching modalities like positive intelligence, CBT, and some other modalities. And the reason why I created this method is because of my own personal experience. It took me over 10 years to figure out, how to get, sort of, to say, a grip of myself, how to climb out of this constant feeling of overwhelm, constantly being at the verge of burnout, constantly feeling that the demands are bigger than I can sustain. And going through and experiencing different modalities and searching for that, I realized that the importance of finding those answers are to take some of the techniques from different modalities and to join them together. So I always start with my clients working at identifying where they are and what their priorities are, how they see life, how they understand life. what is it that they want out of life? Because a lot of the times we're not even aware of these things. And when you're not aware of these things, like, how can you say, you know, what is making you feel bad today if you're not even able, you know, to connect with the needs that you have, right? So these are the first steps to do. And how do you connect with your needs is sometimes relatively simple, you know. Even a simple meditative technique can help you to do that, right? Just finding a quiet space and finding a few minutes a day to yourself and just being there, you know. For some people, it can be a breathing technique. For others, it can be listening to calming music. And I think this is a good basis to start, you know, to start noticing what triggers the moments of overwhelm. So when you are in that calm space, you know, you can look for the things that are helping you and are not helping you, and then start to identify what things need to change in order for you to make a shift from feeling that stress and feeling that burnout into the more safe environment that is actually, you know, bringing you resilience, I would even say. I had an interesting experience with a client of mine, where actually a realization that she made, that the result of her burnout was a lot of the times interpretation of how people looked at her, what they expected from her, and how she was portrayed by these people. So that pressure of feeling constantly observed and needing to constantly, you know, over try and overdo and over perform, so that perfectionism, you know, was making her hate the job. And when we worked through shifting that core perspective, what happened was that she actually started to enjoy being in her workplace, while before she was actually thinking to quit. And it was, she was a teacher, so she was thinking, oh, it's the school, you know, it's the environment. And sometimes it is, by the way, right? I mean, you have toxic environments where you need to identify and you need to say, okay, this is not for me. I cannot be in this environment, and you need to make that healthy decision and go, you know, find something else. But there's something that is actually can be internalized and can be the reason why you are feeling those feelings and why you are leading yourself to burnout.
Yeah, I've had a similar experience with someone who worked in healthcare, and they felt felt that they were put in the corner where they were so overwhelmed, and they were like, "Oh, I never want to get back into healthcare," until the whole industry changes. And they've been working as a doctor for over 10 years. And it's like, okay, we're going through what options they had. And as a result, once we changed the narrative, it wasn't that the whole industry had to change. It was the expectations they had of themselves that they had to perform to, the bar that they had set for themselves to work in order to be successful or feel fulfilled. By changing that bar and how they show up to serve people and changing that narrative, that was all. And they were like, oh, and they were delighted going to work. Then they were looking forward to the next week. And it was something that they felt was completely hopeless, that I could never work in that place again or never show my face to those people again, because they thought that the industry needed to change. But it was simple as changing their narrative and their perspective and how they viewed their work. And of course, that doesn't work in all cases. Some people, once they become aware, they're like, okay, this environment isn't allowing me to grow. And they can address the environment and be like, is there an opportunity for me to grow here? And once they get a clear answer that okay, there is no opportunity for me here, but there is an opportunity elsewhere. And sometimes that's the right decision to make. It can be uncomfortable, but it's about standing your ground and having your boundaries, having your having your limits. And let's say, when I say limits, it's not about holding yourself back, but how much energy are you willing to expend, and know that you may not get the same returns or the same appreciation back without having resentment towards that. What are the things that you are willing to sacrifice if you want to stay here? Or what are the things you're willing to sacrifice if you want to grow? And they're the hard questions for some people to ask themselves. Sometimes as well, when you ask someone what they want and they don't know what they want, and they just give a complete like vague thing like, oh, I want to make 10,000 every month. And it's like, okay. And it's like, why do you need 10,000 every month? And they're like, oh, I feel I'd be happy then. And then you keep on bringing it down to, okay, what brings happiness in 10,000 a month? And it all comes back to, it doesn't need to be 10,000, but it has to be all bills paid with a bit of extra disposable income. And next thing is like, okay, what you want is a feeling of stability and security. And that comes back to your childhood, or that comes back to somewhere where you felt insecure. And what actually makes you happy is that feeling of stability and security. It's not that figure of 10,000 a month. And constantly putting yourself down because, oh, I didn't make 10,000 this month, I can't be happy. And it's just that narrative, again, that niggling narrative in the back of everyone's head. And they just come up with these obscure, like really far out ideas or narratives that don't serve them in any way. And they feel that they're a failure because they're not meeting these ridiculous standards.
I think that in general, in healthcare, I think the people who are wired to help others, they're also wired to think more in the narrative of either a people pleaser or either somebody, who wants to give, but to the level that basically drains them. Because I see that pattern a lot in nurses. I don't have experience with doctors per se, but I think specifically nurses, because they do want to help, and the giving that they want to give is like, I mean, it's really grand, I mean, there's a difference between, people pleasing and real giving, because real giving is like, I would say an example of Mother Teresa, I mean, she wasn't a people pleaser, she was a giver because she generally wanted to help people, right? But the thin line becomes with people pleasing is one, when you're not listening to your own needs and you're still giving, that drains you. And two is when you're giving because you hope to be either liked, or you hope to be loved, or you want to be accepted. So what happens when these are the narratives that pushes you in the people-pleasing behavior? And that's a dangerous zone, because eventually you will build that frustration in your life where you feel that nobody gets you. You feel overwhelmed because you're only giving and not receiving. And at the top of that, you are not being respected in the realm of your boundaries, because people get used to getting and not needing to give back.
Yeah, I've had a guest before who mentioned that difference between caregiving and caretaking. And it was exactly as you said there. It was people who were working as caregivers, but they were only in it because they were searching for fulfillment and purpose by giving care to others. And they were hoping to be reciprocated with respect and appreciation and some sort of fulfillment. And what it resulted in, when they were working in environments where they did not feel that it was being reciprocated, they ended up resenting the people that they were meant to take care of. And by shifting the narrative and shifting perspective of, okay, you're not here to find fulfillment and get appreciation and respect in equal like equal exchange from these people that you're taking care of. It's no, this is a service that you want to give out, but first you need to take care of yourself, because if you are completely drained and exhausted, you're not going to show up at your best to take care of that person, and they're going to feel that too. If you're completely stressed and your emotions aren't regulated, you're probably expressing that in some way and ruining their day too. And that's something that you have to take into account as well. As you need to take care of yourself and how you regulate your emotions, so you can show how you can kind of, you come across as an example then to the people around you, that energy kind of resonates from you. Then if you're not taking care of yourself, people are going to feel that.
Yeah, it's like in the plane, they say, put your oxygen mask first. Why? Because then you can help others, right? Because you can breathe. And that's the same. But the challenge there is feeling that is your responsibility to do all these things, And yeah, that's a challenge, like to realize that it's not your responsibility. I mean, as an example, right, it's my responsibility to raise my children. This is like, I think it's quite a common for mothers. And because of that responsibility, we mothers also tend to put ourselves rather last. But over time, I realized and I've learned that it's actually the balance that makes healthy and happy children. The fact that your children are able to see you take care of yourself and that you model that. Oh my God, the importance of modeling that. This is like, I think the best thing that you can do, because especially like if you're a woman and you have daughters, because what I also noticed that people pleasing in general is a more feminine thing, maybe because of gender roles and how we are, let's say, wired more in this traditional, setting. It's changing, and I love seeing that. But I think, we need still a few generations to really see that change more abruptly. And so as a mother, showing to your daughters that it's important to take care of yourself, you model that. And one of the realizations that I had to make over my journey of self-understanding, self-acceptance, is realizing that I wasn't modeled that behavior. And learning it in adulthood is much more challenging than actually, seeing at least glimpses of that in your childhood.
Yeah, and that's a great example there as well as a mother, because people often associate all these tendencies only affect them in the workplace, and that burnout can only happen in the workplace. It's a workplace phenomenon. But people don't acknowledge you can burn out as a parent. There's parental burnout. You can burn out as a student. Before all the pressures of life, of taxes and bills and everything come on, you can burn out when you're expected to pass all of these exams and all that pressure and all the expectations and all the people pleasing tendencies you may have also, and the narrative you have in the back of your head that, oh, if I don't get top marks on all of these exams, I'm going to be a failure at life. And that is taking pressure on people as young as their teenage years. So it's very important for some people, they invalidate their experience of burnout, or they invalidate their emotions and their stress and their overwhelm, because they say, oh, but I'm not working a 9 to 5. I'm not working 80 hours a week in an office. This cannot be burnout. Oh, I'm not 5 or 10 or 15 years into my career yet. This can't be burnout. And they just, it's they berate themselves for not being able to perform, for not having the energy levels, not being productive enough, not being successful enough. They invalidate their own feelings because they want to be further on in their careers before any of these emotional overloads or overstimulation or burnout happens. And by doing so, they don't get the help that they need. And they end up going through multiple burnout cycles throughout their career that end up holding them back even more, or even quitting that career path, because they feel that it's completely hopeless. And I keep falling down, or I keep failing in the same way over and over again. So why try again? And it's even more heartbreaking as a parent when they feel that, you're completely exhausted and you're just like, I can't do this anymore. And especially, and they feel, oh, maybe I'm just such a bad parent. And that's heartbreaking, because they haven't been shown the skills, or they feel that, oh, there was no guidebook to tell me this is how my kids were going to behave, or there's no guidebook to tell. Everyone was telling me, oh, it's a great idea to have kids until I have them, and then they're saying, oh, your life's going to be a nightmare for the next 20 years. Doesn't stop at 18. You still have to deal with the college years also. And if you don't know how to regulate those emotions, or how to understand yourself, or how to reframe that narrative that you keep telling yourself, how are you meant to overcome those, or how are you supposed to regulate? I think regulate is one of those words where people feel they're like, oh, I should be able to regulate my emotions better, but they were never given the tools and techniques to even be aware of the cycles that you go through.
And the challenge is, like, once you have children, even if you think that you're able to regulate, then it's like, oh boy, that's another level, because children will find all the spots that you cannot regulate, and they are actually the greatest teachers. It's an opportunity to work on yourself. It's an opportunity to acknowledge the pieces of you that are still, could be wholer, so to say, the parts that you can work on in order to grow. And that's a beautiful thing. However, we all have our journey, and I think that's very important also to acknowledge that where you are as a person, that's not a wrong or a right. The importance of that is that you do not compare yourself to your peers, or workmates, because when we start to assume that people are fine, and we can assume that people are doing well, or they are performing well, but you never know, firstly, what is happening internally, so you are comparing yourself to that external image. That's one. And second, when you are comparing yourself to somebody else, you're losing your authenticity. And when you lose your authenticity, that's when you disconnect with yourself, and you're more prone to the feelings of burnout, anxiety, even depression. And the way I like to look at that is that being able to accept where you are is a great deal of recovery. Just saying to yourself, okay, I am burnt out, I cannot cope with it anymore, or I have anxiety, or I feel depressed. Just acknowledging that, it takes so much weight off your shoulders, and it allows that space that you need to find the tools that you need to heal yourself.
I think as well, once you say it out loud, it becomes more tangible. It's like, okay, it's no longer just this niggling voice inside my head. I've said it out loud. It's out there now. Someone may have heard it. Even if you just say it to yourself, and you just say it out loud, and you're like, okay, now this is something I can work with. Because once you say something out loud, you've given it a medium, you've given it some more tangibility. You can say, okay, it doesn't feel as scary anymore. or it doesn't feel as big as it was when it was in my head and it was just growing legs in my head, and I was taking it completely out of proportion. So sometimes having the awareness of what's happening and then just saying it out loud and seeing, okay, how does that sit with me? How do I feel now? Okay, I'm completely burnt out. I'm exhausted all day and I don't know what I want to do, or I don't know how I'm going to move from here. And even just saying that out loud, you're like, well, what can you do? And you start the whole the or what is happening in my life right now that is stressing me out even more. And I think the other part is writing them down, or having, let's say, like a kind of a map, or what do they call it? Like a brainstorm, or like the web thing, the word web. And it's
Yeah.
just like just keep on putting legs on it, being like, okay, what else am I feeling? What is making me feel this way? What can I do about that? And having solutions coming off it. And once you kind of have it out on paper, maybe so it helps some people just to visualize it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, there is something I can do about it. And if there's any ones that you have legs drawn on them and you don't know where there's a solution, maybe you can reach out to someone and see, okay, I actually don't know what to do with this. Maybe I can Google this, or maybe I can search for someone who can help me find a solution for this problem that I don't know how to fix. And rather than feeling helpless, know that there's help out there.
Yeah, and I think a great point there is that often we realize that and we search for these tools. And I mean, there are so many tools available, but the problem is that a lot of the times it's just trial and error. And sometimes it's just good to have someone, who can guide you and tell you, oh, I think this is what is going to work for you, to help you really, get there quicker, because I think it's not a really pleasant feeling to be there. And while sometimes we need to be there because it's like, it's like our body is a 5-year-old toddler, who's throwing a tantrum because you're not listening to that body, And if you're not listening to that body, it's important that, I mean, the body will scream louder. That's what will happen, because it needs you. It needs you to stop and reflect what is going on. And sometimes it's very crucial to find somebody with who you feel comfortable to work together and find that solution that works for you specifically.
That's a good example of having your body's like a kicking and screaming toddler when it comes to you getting out of your comfort zone to grow or to overcome a solution, because your body, isn't it, our primitive instinct is to seek comfort and safety. And because this is the way things have always been for the past 10 or 20 years or more, your body is automatically going to go, oh no, let's go back to what's safe. Let's go back to what we know. Don't make any changes. Just go back to what we know. And even if it's no longer serving you and it's actually holding you back, it's actually causing a lot of negativity in your life, your body's going to be like, oh, but that's the way we know. That's the way we know how to deal with things. We don't want to make any changes. That takes effort. That's going to take more energy. Then we're going to have to need to find more energy in our lives to put towards that. Let's just go back to safety. Let's go back to what's comfortable. And I think that's one of the reasons why coaching is so effective. It can be difficult at first. If someone goes for one coaching session and next thing the barriers go up and they're like, oh no, this is a lot of change for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the important things about coaching is having the small steps to, again, the marginal gains over time. And that can have exponential effect over time. Like one of the smallest steps that I always recommend to people, because it almost feels more silly not to do it because it's such a small step. And one of them is drinking a glass of water first thing in the morning. And that's their win for the day. If they drink that one glass of water, everything else that day is a bonus. If you drink any more water, of course you're going to want to drink something else during the day. But at least you haven't started off your morning with 10 sugars in a coffee frappuccino or something. That's not going to serve you. Start off with a clear mind, and you'll probably make better decisions that day. Or maybe another one is just getting into that positive mindset. And it's like, when was the last time you smiled at someone? Some people are so uncomfortable with smiling that it's like, when was the last time you smiled at someone or someone smiled back at you? And I tell them to go to the bathroom mirror when they're going to brush their teeth in the morning and just smile. Just smile in the mirror. They've smiled at someone, their reflection, and their reflection has smiled back. And they've started off their day with a smile. And that can have a ripple effect into anyone else they meet. It's like, okay, maybe I can practice a second smile with my partner, with my friends, with my dog, with my work colleagues. See if any of them smile back. And
Yeah.
it's trying to find the small steps that will make a change throughout their day. And then we can deal with the bigger things over time. We kind of get them out of the comfort zone. Okay, I can make small changes and they seem pretty easy. Okay, maybe there's a bigger change. Maybe there's a bigger challenge I can take on that can serve me even more.
Totally. That's like how I compare it is like working out in the gym, like if you want to, gain muscle or lose some body fat, one session at the gym will not do it, right? You need to actually strengthen your muscles, and you do that over time. And yeah, sometimes after working out at the gym, you have that muscle ache in your body, is it in your shoulders or in your biceps or, whatever you were working out. That's a nice comparison, and it gives people realization that that discomfort is actually okay. And the beautiful thing about that discomfort is actually exploring what your possibilities are and how your body reacts to different things. Because when you don't take your body to experience those different things, whether it's feelings or physical sensations, or as you said, like drinking water in the morning, which they didn't do, you don't know what is good for you.
The gym's a good example because the muscle soreness only happens maybe a few days later. And people are like, oh no, I feel so sore after that session. I'm never going to the gym again, especially after like a leg day. And it's like, no, I can't walk, or I can't sit down, or I can't lie down without, I can't roll over because of all these muscle pains. I'm never doing it again. But they forget why they got that gym session in the first place. Why did I even go there in the first place if it's only going to leave me feeling sore? And it's their body just adapting to that change. It's like, okay, if I keep doing it, then the soreness will go away. Or when I do feel sore, I know that, okay, I need to give myself some time for recovery so that my body can repair itself and get stronger. And it's about having that compassion, having that self compassion for yourself rather than saying, oh no, your body's sore, never do that again. It's okay, we're making a change here for the better because we have a goal that we want to achieve. And this is part of the process. And
Yeah.
it's okay to feel sore because
Mm-hmm.
that means we're recovering from something or we're making changes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, often the core issue is not listening to your body. And yeah, we get overwhelmed with all these things that need to be done, and we push it aside because over the day you think, oh yeah, I'll do it later, I'll do my check-in moment with myself later, and then by the end of the day, you're basically you have climbed the mountain, right, of stress and pressure, and it's difficult to get back down there. So the more you're putting yourself under that tension and stress, the more used to it you are, the more of your standard that it is. And it's very difficult to bring yourself back down because your body got used to that right now, and it looks at it as that comfort zone, as you said early on. And a beautiful thing there, and an important thing there, is realizing that you are living in that constant tension, you know, that your body can give out a signal. So for example, having constantly tense shoulders, you know, or like needing, you know, a massage or whatever, you know, in your shoulders. And that has to do a lot with the fact that your body is tensing up because you're just tense and feeling pressure from within, right? So you don't get these moments to relax. Another one is your tensed up legs, you know, like you can have a feeling of like, oh, you know, it's like, let's say a feeling of sore muscles, but they're not really sore because you haven't worked out. So all these like small signals that you can actually look in your body that you are not taking care of yourself enough. On top of that, am I listening to my hunger cues, you know, or am I eating when I'm too hungry, you know? Am I checking in? So these are the beautiful moments where you can actually start to learn to recognize what is it that you need.
Yeah, I think people getting back more in tune with their intuitive needs and also understanding which of those behaviors are not serving them, because some people go into binge eating, especially when they're stressed or tired, and it's like, okay, I need to eat a pint of ice cream. That's what makes me feel better. And then taking a step back and being like, does it make me feel better? Because once I finish it, I don't feel good anymore, or I feel guilt or I feel shame. And it's like, okay, maybe that food choice is not serving me to its best potential. What's an alternative I could take there? And I think that's another thing when it comes to fitness coaching. We get nutrition coaching. Maybe the foods we're eating are not serving us, or maybe we don't have a clear mind to focus on these. And these are changes that we need to make, because again, as kids, I remember like chicken nuggets and sausages and fries and all these things were the go-to foods because they're quick and easy meals to make for kids. The next thing, people carry them into their adult life and they're like, okay, this food doesn't sit with me or digest as well as it did 20 years ago, but it's all I know how to make. Or, oh, I'm not used to eating a plate of vegetables. Oh, I need to have all these things. And then next thing is fine. Okay, rather than changing everything, we can change in moderation. We can introduce something small at a time. And over time you get accustomed to the taste, or you acquire a taste for it. And it's not about making radical changes so that you can live a more successful life that you're comparing yourself to others. It's about, no, what are the small changes we can make now, so that over time you know that you're improving little by little over time, rather than feeling stuck here and not making any change.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is one important topic maybe to like point out there, is that in these moments of, I would so call it weakness, you know, when you give in to your old habits, so to say, it has a lot to do with these like core beliefs, you know, how you think of yourself, you know, what you feel of yourself. And often we're not even aware of what the narrative is there. You know, why am I pushing myself into that feeling of stress, you know? It's because otherwise maybe I don't feel good enough, or I don't feel important. Like for me, it was very crucial to learn and to realize that, or I mean, at some point, my realization, which was for me, it was like a mind-blowing moment, was that I was addicted to doing things, and I was actually uncomfortable just being in a relaxed state. And that had to do a lot with how I was raised, and that I grew up actually in an environment that was highly toxic, and it was constantly like walking on eggshells, you know. So that was my safe space. And realizing that, and actually trying to teach your body to, go lower, so under that line of threshold where you actually feel different, was hard. It was really hard. But the amazing thing is the reward that you get.
It just got dark all of a sudden because my ring light died, but it was just a change of lighting. But yeah, as soon as you mentioned that, I was like, okay, you're calling me out too, because I was the exact same. I get completely restless, and it was only I brought to my awareness when I was doing all my self-reflection was the reason why I feel that I can't relax or stay idle was because of where I grew up on a farm. Anytime you were caught sitting around, it was like, oh, you've nothing to do. We'll find work for you to do. We'll find something for you. We don't know what it is yet, but we'll find work to do. So even now, I find it difficult sometimes where I'm like, okay, you have an hour where you can just sit down and relax or and watch TV. But I'm like, no, I need to get up. I need to do something. I need to stay active. Like I can't stay idle. Or even if I am sitting down, I'm looking up, okay, what's the next thing I can talk about in the podcast? What's the next thing I can research? And not actually giving myself the time to relax. And it was hard trying to find things. What are active recovery techniques that I can use rather than passive ones? What are active recovery things that I can use to better use that time where if I can't relax or can't sit down to relax, what are things that I can use to be of service to myself and recover without, uh, like, I know some people, they can meditate and just think of one thing. But for me, it's like using breathing techniques. Okay, I'm still doing something and I'm keeping my mind active, but I'm benefiting my body by recovering. So there are different tools and techniques that you can use, even when you are in a restless state, to help yourself recover or serve yourself in some way.
Yeah, what helped me there, like, because indeed sometimes it can be very difficult, and I mean, like, meditation is not for everybody, right? While it's a good way to, let's say, silence your mind and to kind of reconnect with yourself, like, I tried it over many times and I was like, oh, I cannot do this because I just get even more restless. I have this like impulse of like just jumping and like suddenly doing something. And what I found actually, or how my perception of meditation changed rather, was that you can actually meditate, sort of to say, in different ways. For example, walking and really feeling, how you're putting these legs, what muscles are working, what stride is giving you the feeling, just listening to the birds, if you're walking in the forest or in a park. And this is actually a way of reconnecting with yourself too, and teaching yourself that you can actually be doing something, but gradually tone down the intensity that you feel in your body. This was a great start and a great way to, note it down, so to say, without feeling anxious about, being in that space, because that level is not as intense as just sitting, and meditating.
Yeah, that was something as well that I had in my when I first burnt out, was to go for long walks in nature. That was one of the uh that was my prescription that I was given from my doctor at the time. It was, I want you to take 4 weeks off work. Here's your note, and I want you to go for long walks in nature and just get back in tune with nature. And it was the best prescription I ever got. It was one I didn't think I needed because I was like, oh, I've never taken that much time off work. I couldn't do that. And it seemed so difficult at first, but it was something that my body just needed. I needed to reconnect. I needed to ground myself. I need to just get back that awareness, that an active recovery technique where I knew that I couldn't just sit and be still with my mind. I was still uncomfortable with that at the time. But going for a walk and just sometimes just sitting in nature, going out into the forest and sitting there, and trying to recognize different bird songs and trying to just smell the grass, the dirt, recognize different leaves on the trees, listen for sounds and the feeling of different textures of the soil, of the leaves and things. And it seemed weird at first, but once I got into the habit of it, I was like, this is very calming and peaceful, and something that I definitely have not been doing for the past 10 years. And while at first it does seem silly and awkward and uncomfortable, there are things that you're like, okay, over time you get used to them. Same as the gym, same as any type of coaching, anything to do with meditation or dealing with mental behaviors and CBT. They seem difficult at first, but once you get the repetitions, or once you make it a routine, then it becomes part of your life, and you have those tools and techniques to serve you.
Yeah, and it changes your perception of time, which is also an important aspect, because I think any kind of a stressor in your body is also how you perceive time. You know, that you need to run and rush to one to the next thing is because you're living by time. And there is no moment where time stops. And these are great tools to take and to build in your daily routine is actually crucial, especially if you feel that you are lingering towards that burnout or anxiety, you know. And these tools is what is going to bring you a notch down and help you find that regulation that your body needs so badly.
And if we want to bring it to people's awareness, you know, in a maybe a consultation or a chat with yourself, Amanda, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you if they want to work with you?
Well, people can visit my website, which is www.amandatambuyser, which is TAMBUYSER.com. Or alternatively, I also have a group, so a community where people can actually join and discover together with their peers what does people pleasing do for them and how they can start to change their people pleasing behavior from where it is to a better place, so to say, you know, where they feel better. And essentially what I also do there is occasionally I give free coaching sessions. So this is also a great way to start if you feel that you are a people pleaser. Mind, I work with women only, so that's for women only community.